5th today. So some of these stats might change, but I kind of like to feel like December can count at the beginning of 2025 or when I'm remembering stuff. So I never posted a wrap up for fall, and I don't think I posted a video since the beginning of October. A lot of things have changed. Not a lot of things. Sorry, it's so funny to be like, a lot of things have changed when last year I got married and moved halfway across the country. I just started a new job, and so things are different this year, and it's been a little bit of a time adjusting to that. I no longer have a midweek day off, which is when I used to do a lot of filming and editing and stuff like that. Um, and it's the holidays, and I still work in alcohol, so it's a crazy time of year. But I really wanted to film a wrap up. In my favorite butternut squash sweater, which has made many an appearance on this channel. Um, so let's talk about 2024 in books. So overall, I think I had a really good reading year. I think I discovered more about what kind of books I like, what kind of stories I like, even though I would say I've been getting back into reading probably since like 2020. I feel like this year there's something about actively filming and making commentary about your own reading habits that I think really encourage a level of like introspection and sharing and like calling yourself out. So, and just like knowing when you're kind of just reading mindless stuff and knowing when you're like actually reading things and what you enjoy, especially when I compare to what I was reading a lot of last year. I read 70 books last year, but so many of them were cozy mystery series, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but just taking note of that and realizing how much less cozy mysteries I read this year, I really feel like I'm finding what I like within books as an adult. So I read 77 books this year. My goal was 37 because we decided that together because Nebraska was the 37th state to join the U.S., and I thought that was a fun number. I like making them more fun numbers and things that feel like more attainable goals to myself, even though they are, like, based off my previous reading trends. I'll probably read more than 50 books next year, knock on wood, barring something happening. But I don't ever want to make the goal something so high that it feels like I have to push to enjoy it, because reading goals should be fun, and picking little fun numbers like that is easy to do. So we'll have to think about what we want to read, how much I want to read next year by the end of this maybe. So other trends I noticed, I already said I read a lot less cozy mysteries this year. I still read some, but I read like multiple entire series last year, and technically the Sookie Stackhouse started, I would say, more cozy mystery than it is paranormal romance, so those are kind of a toss-up how you want to count them, but there are 13 books plus a like catch-up book in that series, so 14 of those books I read with the Sookie Stackhouse series, and another 11 were the Clam Bake mystery series, which is a big chunk of that 70. This year I also read significantly less audiobooks. Numbers-wise, I could look it up, but I would say probably about a third to, like a third and a half, so what would that be? A third to maybe like 5/8, I guess. Yeah, 5/8 were audiobooks last year, and I read significantly less audiobooks this year, and I think there's one reason for that. Moving to Nebraska changed a lot of things about my life, but my husband and I talked about this when we first moved here. Our like daily commuting time is down 4 hours a day minimum, and so our average like combined, right? I used to commute anywhere between 35 on the best day to about an hour on the like longer time. Sometimes it could take longer to my job, but he commuted minimum an hour to his job every single day, so I just have less time to listen to audiobooks. But I'm now a liquor rep, which means I drive around a lot more in my car every day, so I wonder if next year we'll see that go up in amount. And if we look at my Fable, I'm going to use Fable probably going forward next year. Not that that's like a huge difference for you guys, but I just really prefer the way you can see certain stats on Fable, although I will give two gripes. It's harder to see average rating, I think, on Fable, which isn't really necessarily something I care about, but it's sometimes fun to organize something and see how you differ from like popular opinion. But on the Fable app, you can see your breakdown by month of each book. But you can't like click into that month and then see your reviews for that book that way. The other thing that threw me off for a while is the genre tag, because it says 23 of the books that I read this year were romance, which didn't ring true to me, which there's nothing wrong with reading romance books, but I would say I've only read 2 pure romance books this year, and they're both Emily Henry. But the genre tag, I was noticing when I looked at the numbers, it is combining multiple genres per book, because my 5 biggest genres were mystery, thriller, fantasy, historical fiction, and romance. But there's more than 30 books in multiple of these categories, which means they're counting like sub-genres within it as the main genre as well, which I think is a little bit confusing if you don't know that right off the bat. So when I think about that, I'm like, oh, so like all those Dina Rayborn series are probably counting under historical fiction and mystery and romance. And that's why it's taking up so much of the pie, which I don't really have a problem with. It was just a little, it took me a while to figure that out. It's not taking just the main genre of a book. My average rating this year was a 3.8. Which rating for 2023 was a 3.3. So my average rating is higher. I rated a lot of things like 3s, and I would say that my average rating should probably even be higher than a 3.8, because in Fable you can do the quarter stars, and when I imported all my Goodreads data, I didn't go back and fix for quarter, half, 3/4 stars for all the books. Dina Rayborn, quickly followed by Janice Hallett, because I read 6 of the like 9 Veronica Swingle books this year, and then I read 4 Janice Hallett books this year. I'm going to do a tag that I saw on Reddit, and I screenshotted it on Reddit, and I immediately got a notification that Reddit does not like that, which I did not know, so I'm sorry. This is the Goodreads tag for last year's end of book tag, but I figured I would add in my own questions, because I feel like I don't always see ones that are like questions I want to answer, but I do recall one being, are there any more books you want to finish this year? And there are 3 books I want to finish this year, mostly 2 books I want to finish this year. The first is The Christmas Carol, because that is a book that is the December pick for my book club with my mom and my sister. We decided nobody would pick a book this month. We all said we wanted to read The Christmas Carol, and we'll start next year with my sister's pick. So we're going to read that, and my sister's never seen The Muppets Christmas Carol, so we're going to try to figure out how to like watch it, screen share, watch it, or whatever, and make gingerbread houses. I'm very excited. It's going to be very cute. Since I can't go home for Christmas this year, we were just home for like 7 days over Thanksgiving. So probably it's an easier time for us to travel than Christmas, but it is nice to have those plans with family. And then I want to read Kristen Hanna's The Women. I started that on the plane ride back. Goodreads is trying so desperately to hold on to all of us. They started this thing pretty recently. It's called Beta, but there's additional reading challenges in the app. And it's basically like you read books off this list during this time period, and you can't go back and see what all of them are. They just like retroactively give you ones if they've decided you did it. And I just have to get one more to get all of them. And I just want it because I just happened to read all of them, and I was going to read Paranesi and then it was like, that's a fall vibes book. So I was like, oh, I'll just make sure I read it before October because I want all the little fake bookmarks I can. And their last one is reading a book that was in the Goodreads Choice Awards before the end of the year, essentially, that was at least nominated, and Kristen Hanna's The Women won. I'm also intrigued why it's so popular. It's not that it's not well written. I've read about half the book at this point. It's just so intriguing to me that it's so all over the internet, because it seems like a break from form for a lot of viral books. It's not super sad and upsetting like I would say something like A Little Life is, which I've never read and I will never read, but I've heard a lot of reviews of that book. And it's not like super high fantasy or super smutty, and it's also not like really feel good. It's a pretty upsetting, harrowing tale of nurses in Vietnam, but not overly like living in the horror of it, but just a very stripped back disillusionment of a character. So I'm so intrigued why so many people are gravitating toward it. Readers like, and also a book that a lot of people who are readers online like. So those are the 2 books I want to read for the end of the year. An unpopular book that you loved. I don't think that there are any unpopular books that I loved. I would say this, and it's with a pretty big caveat. I loved Funny Story more than I loved Happy Place, the Emily Henry books. But it would be a lie to say that those books are unpopular by any stretch of the imagination. I just felt like what I was seeing is Emily Henry diehard fans were not as much of fans as Happy Place, but people who were not big romance readers really enjoyed Happy Place. But even the people who really enjoyed Happy Place and the people who are Emily Henry fans did not love Funny Story as much, and I really liked Funny Story. It's my favorite Emily Henry that I've read. I gave it 5 stars. It's one of the few 5 stars I gave in the second half of the year. That's something else that's fun when I look at my stats. I gave the most 5 stars in February. I gave 7 5 stars in that month, and I think it's because that was the month that I was reading for a video that never got posted of booktuber favorites, and I read a lot of fantastic books that month, and even though that video never got made, I read a lot of books. However, there are a lot of popular books that I did not like, and we'll start with the one that I think I read the most of, which was Eleanor O'Flynn is Completely Fine. I talked briefly about this, I believe, but I did not like that book. I had read about 40 to 50% of it, and I just felt like it was dragging, and I actually went ahead and looked up spoiler reviews for it, and spoiler, like, what happens chapter by chapter to decide if it was something that I wanted to read what happens to see how that would change my perspective, and it didn't. I wasn't looking forward to reading it, so I figured out how it ended, and I decided I don't need to read that book, and I DNF'd that. Pretty, I don't want to say famously, because my videos are not famous, but I did not like A Secret History. Everybody loves that book. Every book girly loves that book. Every reader loves that book, and I just didn't like it. I've never felt more like I was reading a book this year than when I was reading that book. And I was kind of surprised I didn't like it. It has made me nervous to read Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch. Also, that book is incredibly long. But yeah, The Secret History was just not something that was for me, and I talk about it in this video where I say this video ends when I get a DNF. And then I also DNF'd A Study in Drowning, which was a book I was going to read for booktuber favorites, and Cindy really liked that book, and I trust Cindy, so I was like, let me read that, and I did not like it. Okay? I just thought it was boring. Thought it was so boring and not interesting, which I know sound like the same thing, but they're two different things, because the pacing and what was happening on the pages were boring, but it wasn't supported by this concept that I thought was really interesting, that I could be like, okay, even though this is a slow, it's creeping, it's creaking, I thought the whole framework of it was pretty boring, and I just didn't want to read it, so I stopped. I'm not really somebody who has a problem with DNFing a book, so I didn't read it. And then the other, I would say, most notable DNF I had this year was Bride by Allie Hazelwood, which I think is probably the one that I was most likely to dislike. But because of my love of the True Blood series, and I'm recently watching Supernatural for the first time with my husband, I thought I could buy into it a little bit. I'm totally down for stories like that. I mean, I just can't believe people love that so much. Now, I read about 120 pages of that book, and it was excruciating, because that book is dull. That book is so dull. And here's the thing. It's annoying. It's like, why make these characters be absurd? Like, the thing about the True Blood series is, like, they're not well-written books. I don't think anybody's making the argument that they are. But they're fun. And they're fascinating. And the thing about it is, the writing isn't that great. But it doesn't have to be, because there's always plot stuff happening. And there's always more. And the world is always getting fleshed out. And it somewhat makes sense. Like, if you've read all of them, they kind of make sense. I plan to do a video where I reread all the True Blood series and explain it to everybody, because I just want to talk about them more. And those books are fun, and even if they're not, like I said, the most well-written or even the most well-rounded series, everybody is doing something and having fun in it, and I like that. And the thing about Bride is everybody is so boring and annoying, and they're all so, like, serious, and I just want people to be more fun. We have a vampire human werewolf world, and our main character's name is Misery, and her eyes are purple, and to me, that is just the most pick-me, I wrote this on Tumblr, AO3 bullshit I've ever read. And I was like, okay, but, like, we're gonna be self-aware? No, nobody in that book is self-aware that I got to. And I just couldn't believe, because then I was like, oh, well, I'm 120 pages in. How long is this book? 500? Hard pass on that. So I didn't like those books. So, and again, maybe I was the least likely to, of those books, Bride was going to be the one I had less of a chance of liking, but still, I was down to clown. I'm down to clown, you know what I mean? A book that's overhyped in my opinion. Now, not for this year. I mean, I guess you could say any of those books that I DNF'd, but for me, the book that is the most overhyped that I've read, there are two. This year, in my 2014 video, I read Gone Girl, which was an incredibly hyped book, and I think holds up to that hype. But The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, which is admittedly a young adult novel, so maybe it's not really for me. I do think 18-year-old me, which is how old I was in 2014, also wouldn't have liked that book so much. And I was a pretentious snob when I was 18, so maybe it's unfair for me to say that, but I think that book is like a little bit too defining for some people, but it's hard because if some people read that as a coming of age story, it's kind of hard to untwine yourself from things that are really impactful of you at a really impressionable age. But I think that book doesn't really hold up to the hype, especially if you age out of it, which is maybe an unfair statement, which is why I don't necessarily have vitriolic feeling for that. But it's definitely not as life-changing as I thought it was going to be. Now, a book that is flat out overhyped is The Silent Patient by Alex Mukaddes. I did not like that book. I gave it a 2, and I was annoyed that I wasted my time reading it. And it made me realize what kind of thrillers I do and don't like, especially because I read that so closely to Gone Girl. And I realized that, for me, and I say this a lot, but a twist cannot make or break a book like this. Or, for me, that's not my favorite kind of thriller, because if you don't like the twist, you end up not liking the book, but you won't know about the twist until the end of the book. And so for me, I don't like that. I like unreliable narrator, I like that kind of tropes and stuff, but I don't like this kind of twist where so much of the book and your enjoyment of the book relies on you liking the twist, which I ended up not liking. Favorite main character. You know, this is a hard one because I read two book series this year, and so theoretically those are my favorite characters because I've spent the most time with them. But I don't know if I would say Veronica Speedwell and Stoker are my favorite, or Emily Wilde and Brambleberry are my favorite people, because I have spent the most time with them by virtue of those being series, but I don't know if they're like characters that stick out the most to me. I recently read The Immortalists, and so I have to imagine that some of this is recency bias, but I think that story is going to stay with me, especially one of the siblings' perspectives, Clara's, because reading that made me think so much about Margarita Montemore's Acts of Violet, which made me think a lot about Violet in that book. And I think those were both impactful in like different ways. But I don't know if I have like a favorite character. I read a lot of books with really interesting characters, but favorite is a hard word, I think, when it comes to that. Especially because I also don't have to read more books with them in it. Not currently reading. I really recently read Piranesi. I really liked that one. Literature in the Luminous Deep, I liked that one. That's a really character. Yeah, I don't know if I have like a favorite character that I got to read about this year. I liked all the characters that I read, and I think about a lot of them often, and some of them are people that are in series and some of them aren't. So it's hard. Like I said, I spent the most time with Veronica and Brambleberry, so I guess those would be my favorite, but it's kind of hard to say that they're my favorite characters when they're not like the most complex, they're not the most interesting. I don't really think about them so much as characters, and it's not a diss but like when you compare Veronica Speedwell to somebody like Kakai, it's like pretty hard to say, well, who would I want to hang out more with? Or who did I just get warm, happy feelings for? Because I also recently read Piranesi. That's the most recent book I read. And I loved Piranesi. I loved spending time in his head and how he's figuring stuff out. But one, is this recency bias? Or two, do I think hanging out with him would be fun. I just thought the way he was written was so interesting and how he is so compartmentalized in his life. So I guess that's your answer. Most frustrating book you read. I'm gonna take this time to be a little bit on my soapbox because I don't think I had a really frustrating read this year that I haven't already talked about or isn't something that I like DNF'd. I feel like I am very frustrated with the online book community. I know a lot of people already made the comments about this, about like reading is political, and that's really important, but I'm really frustrated with the amount of like overconsumption I see constantly promoted on the book community, and I feel conflicted about critiquing it because I also know that we are more likely to critique women, especially young women, and their enjoyment of hobbies, and imply that they don't actually like their hobby. They like the aesthetic of doing their hobby. And I feel conflicted because I don't know what it is, and I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg situation. But overall, what I want to encourage everybody to do is, hey, it's your money and it's your free time and you should spend it how you want. But I would really encourage people to go visit libraries and take part in the community activism that happens within a library, because reading is political, absolutely, but also so are resources like libraries and public education. And when I think about what's upcoming with the next 4 years, I get really worried about the funding that libraries have, but also the benefit they have to the communities around them often. They're often a safe place for people who don't have access not only to books, but internet and DVDs and third spaces where you can exist without having to spend money, and they're open and they're community allowances. The Omaha Public Library also does things like have zoo passes and gardens passes and seed libraries, and they have like book drives where you can go donate books and purchase books at a lesser cost, and see what you can do for your community, because while reading is often a solitary activity, the community that you can build around it is really important. And while it's so great to have online spaces where you can find similarly minded people and stuff like that, it's always so important to interact with your local community as well and see what can be done that way. And I know I sound like a little bit like I'm on a soapbox, but the amount of times I hear people say the most absurd shit, and I think there was a little bit of a trend going around where people were saying like dissing Libby specifically as an app because they want to read stuff immediately. And hey, I get it. I've definitely looked at books sometimes on Libby and been like, fuck, it's a 20-week wait. I really wanted to read that. But also there's this like disparate trend where people talk about having such a long physical TBR, having books they've owned for years and never read, and they just have books waiting to be read, but they also want to go buy books. And the thing is like, I think it's fine to want to go book shopping and want to enjoy spending time with your friends and annotating and all those things. I think all those things are fine. It's just this thing where I really don't think we should be discouraging people to reach out to free sources first. And especially when you see things like people talking about like buying trophy copies of books they've read on their Kindle and stuff like that. And I hate to disparage that because also, hey, it really is your money and you can do whatever you want with it. But when I think about it, when it's like played that way, I just find it really frustrating. And then I feel like critiquing it, people get really defensive about it. And it's a really nuanced topic, but I think what frustrates me is that I don't feel like what you're seeing online is representative of what most people are doing, which is always the case. But I wish some of these bigger online creators would encourage this level of community. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect and I'm always volunteering at the library, I'm always going to the library and stuff like that, but I really feel like using your in-person library as a resource and also using Libby is really supportive and can help build ties and community in places that you don't necessarily expect it, and just see what these things offer to the community. I've said that word so much, but I think it's important to reevaluate ourselves, and it's kind of like a great way of telling people who spend a lot of time only reading political intrigue fantasy but think that Donald Trump would be a good president to go touch grass. But hey. And then I think that's what I would say. And I also think that I would say that that's the thing that's been the most frustrating to me this year, because I just think people should probably go touch some grass. And just, like, I don't know, like, be so fucking for real right now. Like, come on. So, that's my soapbox. Best adaptation to the screen. I don't know if I've seen any adaptations to the screen this year, but I recently read Interior Chinatown, and I know that that is a Hulu show, and I'm really excited to watch that. Hulu drives me nuts because you don't pay for it commercial free, and I don't mind watching commercials, but Hulu, I swear to fucking God, the more you watch it, the more commercials you watch, and they play the same, like, 6 commercials for 2 minutes, and then 3 minutes, and it drives me nuts. So I just have to commit to, like, watching one episode a night. I know that that is real, like, iPad kid problem. But I guess if I would have to say for this year, I have already seen A Muppet's Christmas, and I've already read A Christmas Carol. And I would say that's a really solid adaptation. It's actually the perfect adaptation. So that would be my answer. A Muppet's Christmas Carol is the best on-screen adaptation. Longest book, shortest book I read. Your favorite cover of the year. I don't know. I don't know what my favorite cover of the year has been. I really liked the cover for The Immortalists. I thought that one was really good. I really liked the pictures inside Entangled Lives. I wouldn't say that cover was my favorite. I should have been prepared. I'll think about that. A book I haven't stopped thinking about. I think about Babel all the time. I think about Bunny all the time. But these are things that you've heard, because you guys know that I thought about those books. I know that I will be thinking about Piranesi for a long time. I thought that was so interesting. It reminded me a lot of These Fleeting Shadows in one major way. But I think that if you've read both, you'll know what I mean. How Beautiful We Were is a book I actually think about a lot. I listened to that on audiobook. That was a book I read in Booktuber's favorites that I never published that video. Caleb from Books and Lala liked it, as did My Name is Martinez. And I loved that book. I think about it a lot. I think about the way that the audiobook was done. So that book, and then also Acts of Violet, probably as well, because of how the audiobook was done. And I think I misspoke, because I think what actually it is that The Immortalist and parts of Piranesi remind me of Acts of Violet, and not These Fleeting Shadows. And yeah, that's definitely How Beautiful We Were was, of course, a beautiful novel. Upsetting, wildly, but a novel I can't stop thinking about. I also, to be honest with you, can't stop thinking about Gone Girl half the time. So I would say those are pretty far up there for books I can't stop thinking about. And then every so often I think about The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay, because I cannot decide if I liked it. I rated it 3.25, which is like the most nothing rating you can give something. It is not strong, but I do feel strongly about it, but I don't know if I liked it or not. Highest rated and lowest rated books on Goodreads. So I think I have both of these. So I took a picture for what has the most. I took a picture of what has the most ratings and the least ratings, and then what has the highest ratings and the lowest ratings. So the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo has the most ratings, and is honestly pretty highly rated. With a 4.41. So yeah, the highest average rating. And then Paul Tremblay's The Pallbearers has the lowest average rating of books that I've read this year, with a 3.1, which is a little bit lower than what I rated it, and honestly, I get that. I also get why the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is so high. It is a compulsively readable book. The book with the most ratings from books I've read this year is The Fault in Our Stars, and it makes sense that it would be a book that's 10 years old with over 5 million ratings. And the book that has the least amount of ratings of books that I read this year is Hot Pot Murder, LA Night Market, which is a random cozy mystery. And then I was like, okay, well, that's a cozy mystery, so what's the next lowest? It's the Hex, A Hex for Danger, which is a cozy mystery that I read this year as well, that I really liked, with just under 1,000 ratings. So again, I think those make sense to me. Both those were releases in 2024, so it makes sense that they would have the least amount of ratings, and also that they would be kind of vague. Cozy mysteries are such a specific niche, I think sometimes. Not that a lot of people don't read them, but to get into that one. And I think that all that makes sense. Um, a book with the most unique concept. It's hard, but I think thinking about it, it's Interior Chinatown, which you haven't read. I highly recommend. The book is written as like a screenplay and script, and it's this person it's this Asian man who's trying to graduate past being just generic Asian man to being kung fu master, or kung fu guy. But also it's told not just like it's a script, like everything's written as a script. Also, part of it is taking place in this TV show, and you have to separate what's real and what's not. I thought it was incredibly ambitious, and albeit high concept and sometimes a little bit hard to wrap your head around what really happened and what didn't happen and how long things are taking. It was a really interesting story, and I think it's something important to read. And I'm excited it has an adaptation, and I just recommend more people read it. It was so intriguing, and also, if you're ever somebody who feels like there are just too many words on the page, which is not a feeling that I haven't felt before in my life, I would recommend reading books that are written in kind of a different formatting, because it can just be nice to read a book like that where there are pages of it that are written out like screenplays or scripts, where there's not a ton of words on the page and it's very clear what's happening. And I liked that they used typewriter font for the whole thing. I thought that was a very interesting concept. A book you read that you would reread. I actually did do a reread this year. I re-listened to The Last Book on the Left, which is a book by the Last Podcast people, since I listened to that. I don't know if I would reread any. I don't do a ton of rereading, just in general. It's like not my thing. I think if anything, I would be willing to re-listen to something that I thought was like a really good audiobook. So I'd be willing to re-listen to some things. Maybe I would be willing to reread The Pallbearers Club all in one go. I had a pretty broken up reading of it. And it's not that I don't like any of the books that I read. I read a lot of really great books, but I just I don't think I want to reread any of them. That's, like I said, not really my thing. Also, shout out for cool concept. Several people are typing a GMA book club pick. I really like that book. It's not the most unique concept, but the horror aspect of it is. It's all told through Slack messages, and one Slack is like the Slack is becoming sentient, and somebody gets stuck in the Slack, and that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a burning desire to reread any of these, not because they're bad, but just because I just don't really feel like rereading them. After 2024, what are you prioritizing in 2025 reading? I realize I read not nearly enough nonfiction. I think that I own nonfiction, and there's nonfiction that I'm interested in reading, but I just don't read enough of it, and I think that's something that I want to do. I always want to diversify my reads, because it's really easy to not, and like doing that is always important to me, and just like being mindful of that. But yeah, my big thing is reading more nonfiction, I think, this year. Just throwing it out there. And then I know this video is probably pretty long. I also want to read all the books that I bought this year. I think in total I bought 16 to maybe 20 books I own physically that I didn't own prior to this, and some of those will be books that I donate, and a lot of them are books that I bought secondhand, but I do want to try to read almost all of them next year. I have a couple big projects that I want to do next year, and my other commitment is not really reading, but I do want to try to post 15 videos next year, so that's one video a month with 3 extras, but I also want to post more, not just like commentary, but like I don't always want it to be themed book reading, because I think that's just really hard for me to do. I'm never going to be somebody who posts vlogs and stuff like that. So maybe content that has a little bit more about like me reacting to stuff or making like lists of some of my recommendations and stuff like that. I'm always so admirable of the people who can make content that I like to watch where it's like themed TBRs and stuff like that, but I just have a hard time doing that and filming them and uploading them in a timely fashion. So, you know, why push that on me, because I'm just going to feel like a failure. So my goal, like I said, is 15 videos next year, and I already have 2 to 3 ideas of books that I want to do, including my Nebraska series. So we will be doing that. I don't know. I read a lot of great books in November and October, and I didn't get to do a reading wrap up for them. So I just wanted to shout holidays and Christmas. Let me know below what your hottest book take this year is, whether it's just liking a super popular book or actually let me know what your guys' favorite book this year was. I would love an opportunity to read them, but also I might look at it if you loved any of the books that I mentioned that I DNF. So that's Eleanor O'Flynn's Completely Fine, Study of Drumming, Secret History, and Pride. Let me know down below. The only one I would give to give another chance is A Secret History. A Secret History, just because I think that is like the most weird for me to like it. But maybe I was just not in a place to be enjoying it. But there were parts of it that reminded me of like reading The Dinner, which I did not enjoy, and that was a book that was kind of a slog to get through. And honestly, I probably would have DNF'd, but I wanted to watch the movie, which I still haven't watched. But it's actually